If you look at why people begin a negative feedback loop, often around 40, is those aches and pains start being enough that it keeps you from doing the things you love doing. So we have our tagline at Restore is Restore, Do More. We want people to do more of what they love. Because I assure you, the more you do the things you love when you're younger and later in life, the better your health span is going to be.
Retail wellness companies are becoming a more familiar sight on the high street, whether it's for an infrared sauna, red light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen, cryotherapy, intravenous drips. There's a lot of choice. It feels good at the time. You might leave with a healthy glow. But how many of these practices actually change our health outcomes? Indeed, are they designed to do that? Are they really good for us? Steve Welch is the co-founder of Restore Hyper Wellness, a company that now has over 225 studios across the United States. Steve's new book, written with co-author Jim Donnelly, is Restore, the life-changing power of right-away wellness. Hello again, welcome to the Live Long and Master Aging podcast. My name is Peter Bowes. This is where we explore the science and stories behind human longevity. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Peter, thanks so much for having me.
Really good to talk to you. I think before we dive into some of those topics, can you give me your definition of what wellness is in the way that the word is used these days?
Yeah, and I'll even, we call it Restore Hyper Wellness. And Hyper Wellness is the consistent and passionate pursuit of one's own health and energy levels. The reality is the services and therapies that we talk about, doing them once every now and then, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But really to change outcomes, to your point, it needs to be consistent. And the way to get consistency is for people to be passionate about their health, to continue to invest, not go once or twice, not run once a year, but make it part of a routine. And that routine's ultimately is how you get different outcomes.
I notice an interesting line in the book, pretty much to that point. You say, and I'll just quote it, you say, picture yourself in the greatest possible state of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual wellness. Whatever that looks like is what you're working towards. That's your horizon.
Exactly. And I think in that statement, you see it's different for everybody. And I think, the goals and aspirations you have when you're 22 are often very different than when you're 72. And to expect your body's going to perform the same at 22 as it does at 72 is also a misnomer. So I think what we have done an amazing job of, and the reason that there are so many Restore locations out there, is that we are getting people on their health journey. We're trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish. Everybody's different. Some people, you have 20-year-olds that are trying to set a personal record in a 100-meter dash. Some of my favorite stories are people that are 60 that just want to be able to continue to walk every day and live the life they want to live. Nothing crazy, but something certainly that changes their life. And what Restore has done a great job is understanding that about our clients and then building a plan for them to achieve that.
Well, let's jump into that in a second. Before we do that, have you always been this super healthy, health-focused kind of guy? Just give me an idea of what your life has been to this point and maybe what led to setting up this company and your specific interest in this area.
Yeah, so Peter, I've had a mixed life when it comes to health. I started my first company when I was 23 called Mitos. We made the back-end systems that are used to manufacture vaccines. I was 23, didn't know any better. I bootstrapped that. I worked 70 to 80 hours a week. I had McDonald's for breakfast most mornings. I had Dunkin' Donuts for breakfast, McDonald's for lunch and dinner. Absolutely terrible health style for my 20s. I sold that company, then started a company called Dream It Health, or Dream It. It's a venture capital firm. We really focused on the health side of things. And during my 30s, started the transition. Things changed. You have more time. You have kids. I had a wife that was very health conscious. And one of the things you realize as you kind of go through life is the people you surround yourself with that have a pretty big impact on you. So if you're surrounded by smokers, there's a increased chance you're going to smoke, and if you're surrounded by people that eat healthy, you're going to eat more healthy. But the passion and where I actually live a very healthy lifestyle now came from my father. My father was in his late 60s. You'd have looked at my father and you'd have said, this person looks like he's in amazing shape. In fact, I think he was number 7 in seniors tennis just a couple years earlier. But he had emergency quintuple bypass surgery. You'd have looked at him, you'd have said, there's nothing wrong. He's looking in great shape. The reality is, while he exercised his whole life very effectively, he ate like total shit his whole life. He would, Diet Dr. Peppers, he ate McDonald's a lot. And it was that wake-up call, watching him go through that process, that it really inspired me to make a lot of changes about a decade ago. So today, I'm a pescatarian. I've always exercised, but I exercise much more routinely. And I've done a number of other things that we'll talk about as we go through here. But I think seeing that, and I think this is so true of many people, it is seeing people you love go through, seeing the decisions they made early in life and seeing how they affect them later in life. That's the impetus for change in our own lives. It is amazing how many of our clients come in and they'll say, you start out, why are you there? And it is a spouse or a brother or a parent that's had a health issue. It's not even them that's had the health issue. And that's forcing them to kind of look at their health. And right or wrong, in this country, we just haven't trained people to invest in their health. We've trained people, we're excellent at training people to invest in their retirement, in their education, their homes. I mean, these are investments that every American is trained to make. However, up until very recently, there was not kind of a focus on investing in your health. And I'd argue, investing, much like retirement, deciding at 65, I'm going to start saving my retirement, probably doesn't work out really well. Same thing's true on your health. If you wait until you're 65, that doesn't mean you can't improve your health, but it's the investments you make early in life that are going to have a long-term impact over a long haul.
So it's fair to say that there wasn't a specific sort of light bulb moment for you. This was a gradual change in terms of seeing the light and realizing that fast food diet that you were eating as a younger man wasn't good for you, and making those, as you've said, those observations about the people close to you.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think like almost every person over 40 can remember a time when they would wake up and they would just say, man, I just didn't used to have these aches and pains, or I used to have more energy. And I think that's why, our clients tend to be in that age group. And I think it's because at that point, God bless them, when you're in 20, you can abuse the body. You can go hard, you can exercise hard, you can drink a lot, and you can still manage through that. As you get older, that gets harder, and that's why people start to think about it as they age. When you don't feel the pain, sometimes you don't realize the damage you're doing to your body.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people listening to this will feel exactly the same way, that they've gone through that same journey. And yes, it does tend to hit you, doesn't it, when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, some people a little later in life, maybe 60s or even 70s, realizing that the way that they used to live isn't the way that they want to live now. So what I'm curious about with you is, how did you make that transition from obviously becoming more self-aware about your own health to actually creating a business? Because that was quite a big leap, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really is. My background, I've been very entrepreneurial. Like I said, I started a company when I was young that was very successful. Then I started Dream It Ventures. At Dream It, we became the second most active healthcare investor in the country. So we did over 400 deals over about 15 years, and a lot of very successful health companies. So health is an area I've always been involved in. I fundamentally believe as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of ways to make money. There's a lot of businesses you can start. What I've always been passionate about is making sure that I invest my time and energy in something that is good for society. And I have there are a lot of people out there that make money different ways, but I wouldn't be able to wake up, I wouldn't be motivated if I didn't wake up thinking that my efforts, my energies, my talents every day they need to be used on something that I think is really going to move society forward. And the kind of the impetus for Restore is my partner Jim became an avid doing cryotherapy. The funny story here is I was running Dream It at the time. He started doing cryotherapy. We were training for a triathlon together. He started to try to get me to do it. And at the time, I was seeing 10,000 ideas a year. And I will tell you, one of the downsides of being an early stage investor is you kind of get jaded. Trust me, any idea you've had, somebody else has had. I mean, every idea is out there, and you get a little skeptical because there's a lot of ideas out there. Very few of them actually break through. So to me, it sounded like total BS. I was like, cryotherapy, just go get an ice bath. So one day we went and we did a 35-mile bike ride in the hill country. He finally broke me down and said, I'm going to pay for you to go do cryotherapy. I did it, and the next day I woke up and I felt great. And you can't see this on this podcast, but I have these little chicken legs, 35 miles in the hill country here of Austin. Normally the next day my legs are total jello. And that's really what got my attention, was like, hey, there was something there. And then over the next couple of years, Jim and I really focused on testing different products and services, for both efficacy and making sure the science was there, but also more importantly, could we make an experience for the consumer and a membership for the consumer that would add value to their life, that would help them get on a journey that would change their outcomes. So that's really how we got started. And Jim was the absolute heart and soul of the business early on, getting it going, getting the franchise system going, and it did an absolutely marvelous job.
And I think one of the key phrases you've just used is making sure the science was there. And obviously, we should say, and you've explained your background, you're not a scientist, you're not a doctor. So I guess one of the key challenge in the early days was, as you've just described, to surround yourself with the best people who could understand the science, who could read a scientific paper. And that isn't something that is easy for most of us to do with that extreme detail. I'm talking about peer-reviewed papers. How did you go about finding the right people?
Yeah, it's a great question. My background is actually, I'm an engineer by training. Again, this is where I've been fortunate that it's been over a decade in the healthcare industry and early stage where you have kind of the new ideas that are up and coming, and you're surrounded with people that are thought leaders. So we instantly put together a medical advisory board, found doctors that were passionate about this space, and from that really tried to understand what's real and what's not. And I'll tell you, there's a challenge in this space. Right or wrong, the pharmaceutical industry has basically convinced everybody, unless there's a double-blind study, it's not, it doesn't work, or there's no proof. And the reality is there's many things that are hard to do as a double-blind study. What I think we tried to do is look at, number one, making sure that we were introducing things that there was evidence that they did work. It didn't mean they were safe to do. So those were kind of the two criteria that we looked at. And the evidence is different, and there is. One of our science officers says, absence of evidence doesn't mean something doesn't work. It just means you need to go out and develop the knowledge. One of the things we made a goal very early on was being very data focused for our clients and trying to bring that data for products and services that maybe the market didn't have that information. So, for example, we now have studies out there that are peer review published that shows the effects not just of one of our therapies, but what happens when you combine them together. Because I think the reality is, even looking at I got saunas. There's a tremendous amount of good information out there that shows sauna provides value. Here's a real question. What happens when you put saunas with IV therapy, or you put saunas with photobiomodulation or cryotherapy? And it was really trying to look at putting people on a path on a holistic way when they're doing multiple therapies, how that would impact them. And what you see in our studies that are peer reviewed is we've had a huge impact on our clients' lives. And we focus every day. We have a partnership with the Oura Ring. I don't know if you're familiar with the Oura. It's this little ring here I wear. All right, you got one.
There's
there.
my Oura Ring. Yeah,
we think
I'm a little addicted to it, like I know a lot of people are.
Well, so we love work for research. So when we do clinical studies, we have everybody has a Oura Ring on. But as a consumer of Oura, what's amazing is people that are focused on their health tend to be type A. They tend to be very data driven, very goal oriented, and it highlights what's working and what's not. And what we found is when we put an Oura Ring on somebody and then coach them with what that information means, is they see the decisions they make, how they impact them. And once they see that, it's easier to make change because, Americans, people across the globe, we're pretty terrible. Human beings are pretty terrible at making decisions today that are going to affect them 20 years from now. I mean, it's just the return doesn't seem like it's there. We're actually remarkably good at making decisions today that affect us today. So, what we're trying to do is highlight and show, like, hey, maybe drinking that soda right before going to bed. Look what that did to your sleep, and you can tell you don't feel as well the next day. Or alcohol. The first thing that almost every Oura Ring person realizes is when they drink alcohol affects their sleep. So it's not just even that alcohol affects your sleep. It's literally how close to bedtime it happens. So that data, right, yes. that bringing that to life really is empowering the consumer in a market where the consumer hasn't been empowered. I mean, our system, and I will tell you, I think our healthcare system is absolutely amazing. If I had cancer, there is nowhere in this world I would ever want to be other than the United States. But it's set up to address people once they have problems. It is not set up to help people when they're trying to decide and understand what they need to do to not have problems in the future. I think that's where companies like Restore, and there's a number of others in the system or in the country that are out there really helping clients get on that journey and understand their decisions today, what they're going to mean for them tomorrow.
So I posed the question when we started in terms of health outcomes. And what I mean is longer term health outcomes as opposed to that feel good feeling that you might get as you've recently emerged from cryotherapy or you've had a red light sauna, something that gives you that glow, or as you described, you wake up the next morning and you feel good. I think one of the questions remains around the longer term implications for the human body of something like, let's take cryotherapy, and whether the science backs up a claim, if indeed there is a claim, that it will help you with your longevity, that it would potentially help you live longer and better. Where are we in terms of the science, in terms of the claims that can be categorically made?
Yeah, so I think what I'll talk to is what we have research on our side, which clearly shows that cryotherapy reduces inflammation. And the data we have coming out of, we use a cryo machine that we manufacture ourselves. It is unique. It is designed so that we have control of certain parameters at certain temperatures. And what we have proven with that machine is not only does it reduce inflammation biomarkers in the short term, and that it obviously does, but even once you stop doing it for the next 6 months, you see a reduction of inflammation. So, I think it is impossible for us to tell at this point what that means 30 years later. I'm the first to acknowledge that. But I think what's more important is, the reason it's so important to feel good today is that keeps you moving. I think let's start with this basic premise. The more somebody moves, they get their body, they're walking, they're running, whatever it may be, the better life or better their health span is going to be. I think that is almost undeniable. Can we agree on that one?
We can totally agree. And in fact, I'm often asked, what are the top 3 things that you would recommend with all of these amazing interventions that we can involve with ourselves these days? I always say movement or stroke exercise, and then sleep and a good diet. But movement is, I can wake up with a sore back and go for an hour-long hike and then feel 100% better. Yeah.
No, I agree. Number 1 on my chart when people ask me the question is that same thing, movement. In fact, that it is substantially above anything else. What I can tell you is, and is from my own personal experience, but we see this in the data as well, is cryotherapy gets rid of those aches and pains. It is those aches and pains that keep people from moving. If you look at why people begin a negative feedback loop, often around 40, is those aches and pains start being enough that it keeps you from doing the things you love doing. So we have our tagline at Restore is Restore, Do More. We want people to do more of what they love. Because I assure you, the more you do the things you love when you're younger and later in life, the better your health span is going to be. So what we're enabling people to do is really give them the tools to continue to do those things they love doing. So for example, I'm fairly sore today. I played pickup basketball last night. I got up first thing in the morning, I did compression therapy, and then I went and did cryotherapy. And I will tell you, I feel way better now than I did earlier this morning. Now, when I was 22, the thought of actually even being concerned of what I felt like the next day after basketball, there wasn't even a concern. You play basketball for 3 hours, and the next day I woke up, I felt nothing. I played basketball last night for 30 minutes, and I felt it the next day. So, really what we're trying to do is give people those tailwinds to make their lives better today, knowing that if you keep moving, if you keep doing the things you love, that you're going to be in a better place in the future. And again, I think the data will prove that out over time. We are collecting that data, but I also it'd be arrogant of me to say we have that at this point, or
What does the data tell you about the frequency with which you need to do something like cryotherapy? And just to explain for anyone who's never experienced cryotherapy, this is usually a 2 to 3 minute process. You jump in the chamber, you get very cold, and you jump out. But how often do you need to do that to see reasonable results?
Yeah, so let me start with just a little more specifics on that. We take you down to negative 160 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is very cold. So it is not for the faint-hearted. With that said, once you do it, the reason our business works is from a business standpoint, people feel the results instantly. You have aches and pains, you feel that impact. By the way, cold therapy is not something new. The oldest known text of man talked about cold therapy. The Hippocratic School of Medicine, 1000 BC talked about cold therapy. So these are not new concepts. Every doctor recommends ice and things like that. So certainly not new concepts. They're out there. Frequency is something we're looking at. We're actually pulling into our data and understanding, trying to understand that. What is the frequency? I'll give you my own personal experience, which is I try to go once a week at a minimum, and then I go absolutely every time I feel aches and pains. And that has kept me. I'm 47 years old now. I kiteboard frequently. I wish it was every day. It's certainly not every day. I go surfing a lot. I play basketball with the kids. I play soccer. I run 3 days a week pretty aggressively. And without cryotherapy, that list I just went through, could I do those things? I could. I would be doing them way less. There's absolutely no question about it. So I think the data is going to come with time. We are very focused on that. We are doing both blood testing and testing with wearables to prove that out over time.
Let's talk about IV drips, which I know have also become hugely popular with many people. But for some, it is quite a significant leap from something like a sauna or cryotherapy. This is something that involves an intravenous injection of a fluid, whether it's vitamins or whatever it is. But I'm curious in terms of the data there, comparing an IV drip with, let's just say, a very balanced diet, let's say your pescatarian diet, a diet that's full of greens and strong nutritional values. Are you getting significant more through an IV drip than you would through your diet?
Yeah, well, let me start with, I completely agree. The most important thing is diet. Let's start with that. That is the North Star. That is harder to do in today's society. I mean, I have a very healthy diet, but I will tell you, I travel a lot. And when you travel in this country, it is hard to go to a restaurant. They're out there, so I don't want to totally judge, but it's hard to find restaurants that have healthy food. It is hard to go to the grocery store and see healthy food these days. So I think start with this basic premise that in America, over the last 60 years, the quality of the food system has diminished pretty drastically, which makes the nutrients very hard to come by. It's also true.
And I think, I'm just sorry to interrupt, but I think you're probably being quite kind as well to the restaurants in the United States. I mean, we could be quite negative and look around us and say it's actually quite a shocking state of affairs, sometimes the availability of food in this country.
Yeah, and it's not just I actually think it's the larger supply chain. To the restaurant's defense, they have to be able to buy high quality foods, and that's getting harder and harder. So,
right.
But yeah, so a couple of things. I am not a doctor. I'll start with that, and I would love to have one of our chief medical officer or medical director on board that would talk about this in more depth. But what we know is absorption rates are different for everybody. So even when I eat certain things, there are certain people that could eat, blueberries every day, and certain parts of those blueberries are not going to absorb it in their system. And the absorption rate tends to change over time. When you're 8 years old, you get everything goes. It is pretty darn amazing. When you're 60, that absorption rate probably is lower. Okay, again, everybody's unique, everybody's different, and that's why we do micronutrient testing at the studios. So I would recommend, people often ask me, what is the first thing I should do at Restore? And I say, if you're just focused on general longevity health, go do a micronutrient test. Go do a blood panel in general. Understand your cholesterol, understand your HbA1c, understand your micronutrient levels. And what you'll find is, as you get older, you're going to be deficient in some of those things, even with a healthy diet, almost everybody. So for example, I eat very healthy. However, I still end up deficient in 4 things. So I take 2 of those as actual supplements, and I take 2 of them through a oral form, and I take 2 of them through IV form. And I am not, as long as I'm doing that, I'm actually not deficient in those things. And I think the reason those deficiencies are so important is what that ultimately gives your cells. I mean, you and I are both made up of roughly 37 trillion cells. Those cells have chemistry that go on. They need each component of that chemistry to function properly. So being deficient in something, even one thing, can really throw the body out of whack. And what we're trying to do is help people understand what they are deficient in, and then make sure they get it back in the most effective way. And there's certainly different ways to get that. For us, there's a pretty strong evidence that IV is the most efficient way, meaning it's going to get to the source it needs to very effectively. And we have, IVs in general, again, nothing new. I believe, and I could be off of this number, there's 200 million IVs done in this country in the emergency rooms every day. And if you talk to any doctor or even people in the military, when you're not feeling well, giving yourself an IV has been kind of the best kept secret they all did and didn't tell anybody about for a very long period of time. So, and it's because, you're getting those nutrients directly to the bloodstream, and you feel it right away. Again, I travel a lot. I'm susceptible to getting sick. I have 4 little kids. Kids are Peachtree dishes. If you want a surefire way to make sure you get sick in this life, be around a lot of little kids. They're at daycare. But I get the micronutrients back. I make sure when I'm not feeling well, I go get high dose vitamin C and things like that, and it keeps me from getting sick. So again, nothing new out there. Myers cocktail is probably the most well known. The Myers cocktail was developed several decades ago, really to help people that were struggling through chemotherapy, and to make sure they had chemotherapy in itself. You obviously depletes the body's energy levels, the micronutrient levels, and it was ability to add those back. And in that sense, there's actually a pretty enormous amount of data that shows that in those kind of when you're putting your body through those kinds of stresses, that having that additional micronutrient add really benefits your ability to recover. And I think it is not a huge leap of faith to believe that's true, not just for people that are going through chemotherapy, but anybody that's got challenges in their life, that whether it's stress from travel or excess weight or anything out there that really drags on us.
So the dilemma for a lot of people is, what is best for me? What am I potentially deficient in? And looking at the menu when they get to your studio, which of these should I choose. It's a little bit like going to a restaurant, isn't it? Well, that sounds good, but I've got limited funds here. So what can you do, what do your people at the studios do to help people really to decide what is best for them and what is most appropriate?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that I would highly recommend is actually sitting down with the nurse in the studio. Understanding, what you're there, why you're there, whether it's because, hey, I have aches and pains, or I'm dehydrated, or I'm feeling sick, or I have a headache, consistent headaches. And it is that professional nurse practitioner, a nurse RN in the studio, a nurse practitioner that they have access to, that really helps get them on a journey that is custom for them. Because as you just said, everybody's so different. I think one of the reasons the consumer has gone in a different direction than the healthcare system, and the fact that the consumer understands better than the system that everybody's individual and everybody has unique needs. Everybody responds to things in a different way. And what's different today than it was a decade is the consumer realizes the importance of this and is out there trying to solve these problems. And it's places like Restore that give them an avenue to connect with professionals in the space to try to understand what they can do to improve their health. I think the first step is always there's a professional team at a studio. They are amazing. They're there. They love it. One of the neat things about Restore, it's quite different than a hospital. Our nurses, a lot of them actually, most everybody came from a hospital setting. And what they'll tell you is the reason they love working at Restore is it is very different working with somebody every day that is proactive about their health versus somebody that is now in the hospital. They made some bad decisions often, but then sometimes it's just the nature of life. They're there, but often it's too late to really make changes. Where they love working at Restores, they get to work with a client, they get to see them a couple times a week often, and they get to help build them and get them on that journey.
How affordable is a visit to Restore? Because I suspect for a lot of people this is just beyond what they are capable of spending on themselves, and they might want to, but then they'll look at the price list and think, well, in this day and age, especially with the cost of living crisis that many people are dealing with, is this within the range of the healthy wealthy, as we often hear about these days, or is it something that, let's just to use the phrase, ordinary people can take advantage of, at least to some extent?
Yes, our mission from day one was to make these products and services more accessible. LeBron James, if you go to Restore, LeBron James has a Restore in his house. He has a massage therapist. He has a nurse. So that portion of the population was already catered to. But what we saw is it shouldn't just be for LeBron. It shouldn't just be for the super wealthy to have access to these things. So each individual therapy we provide, the goal was to make it much more accessible. Today we are membership based, and I'll tell you, your membership will be cheaper than if you go to Starbucks every day. It'll be cheaper to go to get a membership at Restore, and I'd argue for sure that's going to improve your health more than Starbucks. So they are. It is an investment. There's no question. It's an investment, both time and money. But if you look at the return on that investment, I don't think there's a better place that you're going to spend your money than at a Restore or anywhere else where you're investing in your health today, not 20 years from now when it's too late.
Isn't it? I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Steve. It is for some people a psychological dilemma, isn't it? That it's so tempting, whether it's Starbucks or whatever your coffee shop of choice is, that what's usually about $7 these days for a grande, whatever it is, as opposed to spending that money on something like you've been talking about. Can you help people with that dilemma? There's that impulse buy of the coffee, isn't there? As opposed to the more considered decision to do something that could potentially benefit their health.
Yeah, so the Starbucks coffee or wherever it may be is loaded with sugar. It's loaded with caffeine. There's a lot of things that literally happen at a chemistry level that tell the brain, I want that, I want that, I want that. Again, where I think we've really differentiated ourselves versus other players in the space is that understanding of starting with why you're there. It all starts with why. And from that, it is helping the client develop a plan for them to address whatever that why is, whether, again, it's to get over an injury or whether it's to improve their energy levels. And the reason the business works is we're able to change that for them. People leave feeling better. They leave over a long period of time seeing results. Because of that, they stick with the programs. But, we come, you will leave. If you come to the Restore, literally they'll spend some time with you and you'll leave with a wellness plan. This is what we recommend. It may be cryotherapy twice a week, sauna twice a week. It may be a drip with these 3 things once every other week. No matter what it is, you'll leave with what that plan looks like. And from that, I think that's where the investment, we have to do a better job as a society of saying, yeah, $7 a day on coffee is $210 a month. That's a big expense. my Restore membership's $180, whatever it may be. There's different tiers, but I think there's no question. Everybody would agree that the investment, if you will, on your health as opposed to the sugar hit over a long period of time is going to have a better impact.
And the key here, isn't it, is being proactive. It is thinking about your health, and you've already referred to your concerns about the American health system, and we often hear the phrase that this is a system that is just treating sickness, and we hear very little about preventative care. It is ultimately down to the individual, isn't it?
100%. We have to make choices every day, and those choices are going to have impact on our lives. We have agency over our lives. I think as a society, sometimes we seem right now to be losing that idea, but we all have agency over our lives. And, I think what we need to do as a society is empower the consumer to understand, again, how their decisions today are likely to affect them in the long term. And I think that is the challenge, which is that's not always easy to see. And I think that's why 22-year-olds are pretty terrible at making good health decisions, because the body doesn't give them any kind of signal that, hey, that's a problem. Whereas you get older, you get that signal. And I think the key is, for us is that once that signal starts to happen, hey, I do have aches and pains, I do have loss of energy, that is where the consumer is going to be willing to make those investments. And that's really why we focus on that age group. It's not that we don't like 22-year-olds. It's just that 22-year-olds, we see the retention on the 22-year-olds is actually pretty low compared to somebody that's 42. And it's because, again, their bodies are just too good. If you're 22 and out there listening, it's pretty amazing. You don't appreciate one of my favorite expressions from my father is, youth is wasted on the young. And there's a lot of truth to that. Again, as you get older, you start to appreciate that.
Do you see that potentially changing, though, those attitudes of younger people? I often say, if only I knew when I was in my 20s and my 30s what I know now about health and fitness, my life would have been probably quite dramatically different in my health status throughout my life. Yeah.
I think there's some indication it is changing. If you look at alcohol consumption, it's going down for young people. This is a much deeper dive, but if you get into there's conflicting headwinds for the youth. Number one, I think they do understand risks better. So if you look at things like unwanted pregnancies are down. If you look at sexual activity at a young age is down. You look at alcohol consumption is down. However, it's also being replaced with a lot of things that are pretty negative. So more screen time, less movement, less exercise, more isolation. So I think we're helping them by helping them see the risks that are out there with some bad decisions. But I also think there might be that we're scaring the crap out of them so they don't leave their bedrooms. And I think there is this balance. I'm full disclosure. My wife and I are free range. We have free range children. I wait every day for the police to show up at our door because we just let the kids run around. That has not become common. And I suspect in my own neighborhood we're kind of the weirdos. But I do think we got to find a way to get kids back out, moving, socializing. That's the part that's there's so much good progress that's been made, but it's been made at the expense of some pretty serious negatives that we got to figure out how to fix.
Just to drill briefly into that, you say free range children. What exactly do you mean?
Yeah, it means our kids, we kick them out of the house in the morning, and we live on Lake Austin, and they can go be on Lake Austin, and nobody's going to drown, and we're hiking trails. They go play in the woods, and they can be at friends' houses. They do have to tell us when they're going to be home. They got to give us an indication of where they are. But truthfully, in the middle of the day on a weekend, I often don't know where the kids are, and I'm totally fine with that. I think that's a healthy thing. But that is definitely not the norm.
It sounds like a blissful childhood to me. Steve, you mentioned alcohol just a moment ago. It was interesting. I was at a health focused conference recently and doing a little round table with people, and it was the younger people in this discussion who were more determined that they didn't want to drink, and the crucial point was that they felt respected by their peers for not drinking, which I think is quite a seismic shift from that peer pressure that I think maybe a lot of us felt when we were younger to start drinking. That does seem to be changing in quite a significant way.
That's great to hear. I think that's true, and I think that's pretty amazing.
What is your view on alcohol? I'm quite interested in alcohol because about 5 months ago, I didn't have one of those days where, right, I'm going to stop drinking alcohol. It just kind of phased out of my life, and it's no longer of interest to me. I still like the taste of it, but I don't drink it because I don't see it doing me any good, and don't particularly enjoy it in the medium to long term. And we're talking relatively small amounts of alcohol. A glass of wine, one bottle of beer is no interest to me anymore, and I feel overall much better for not doing it.
I'm probably not the right person to ask. Well, I'll give you my story with alcohol, which is, I almost never drink alcohol. I don't do it for a couple reasons. Number one, I choose not to do it because I think kids model behavior they see. And by me not drinking, I think it reduces the chances of them drinking. So that's the primary reason today. But when I was about 27 years old, so I went to college. I drank a lot in college. I drank a lot post-college. When I was building my first company, any client that wanted to go out and drink at night, I would go out with them. I mean, without fail, 7 days a week. I was hungry, trying to survive as a company. But about 27, I'd been out until like 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't even know why, but been out, and I was hungover. I woke up at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd missed my nephew's football game, which I loved watching. And I wrote a letter to myself that day. I said, you're pissing your life away. You're missing the important parts of life. Don't do this. And from that point on, I very, very rarely drank. Again, I sometimes will have a sip of beer if it's around and there's no other option. But that's a choice I made, and that was an easy choice for me. I don't think that's easy for a lot of people. I think alcohol is addictive, like sugar. The challenge I have for a lot of people, and this is controversial, which has done more damage to society, sugar or alcohol at this point. And there's pretty good debate on both sides. But I think that people are all realizing the damages. And I think, again, Oura Ring's a great example. Just even, the amount of friends I have that would have 1 or 2 glasses of wine a night, and to be able to see what that did to them, that really is what enabled them to say, hey, this just isn't worth it. It's not worth not feeling perfect. And as you just mentioned, but once you stop drinking, the idea of drinking is terrible. Like if I drank a beer at this point, I think I'd wake up hungover. One beer, I suspect I'd be hungover. So it's the good news is once you do stop drinking, it kind of reinforces, hey, it's just not worth it, because when you do it, you feel like such crap.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's actually a feel-good feeling from not drinking. And it's not just that, oh, aren't I clever, I'm not drinking. It's actually a physical sort of sense of well-being that you get from not thinking about it, knowing you're going to be clear-headed. I think perhaps this is the biggest for me, knowing that you're going to be clear-headed the next morning.
So, Peter, how do you manage sugar?
How do I manage sugar? I try not to eat foods that have added sugar. But clearly, I eat a lot of fruit, but that is the kind of sugar that I think is acceptable. I don't eat processed food most of the time. I don't eat food out of packets. I'm probably quite similar to you in many respects, that I'm a pescatarian as well. So I try to eat lots of vegetables and get my protein from legumes and from nuts and from beans and from peas. And I love Indian food, a lot of really good vegan/vegetarian food in that sphere. And I might have salmon a couple of times a week. So I don't eat breakfast cereals with added sugar. I eat oatmeal, which some people don't think is a particularly good idea, but I quite like my overnight oats, and I love my berries, and bananas give me a nice energy boost. That's my kind of diet.
So which was harder for you, kicking alcohol or kicking sugar?
I would say probably sugar. Alcohol kind of phased itself out of my life, but I still consume some sugar and could probably, if I really deeply thought about it, eat less sugar. And so, yes, I think not from a mindset perspective, but I think more from a practical perspective. Yeah. It's harder to get sugar out of your life.
Yeah, I think it's more addictive too. So cutting out red meat, it was easy. My wife cooks bacon for the kids in the morning, and I will tell you the hardest thing if you're a pescatarian is if you smell bacon, it's just heaven. It's like torture. But getting rid of meat was easy. It is, for me, the challenge is sugar. Like I have a sweet tooth. It calls my name. If it's in the house, I'll eat it. And this is why, one of the life hacks I think is really important for people is, surround yourself with good people, number one, but that have healthy habits, but also surround yourself with good foods. And if the good foods are there, you're going to eat those. If the crap is there, you're going to eat the crap. So it's, for me, I beg my wife when she goes to the grocery store and when I go to the grocery store, please just don't buy the snacks, because if they're there, I'll eat them.
I agree with you. I'm no angel when it comes to this sort of thing. And if there's a birthday cake in the fridge with beautiful sweet cream on the top and a chocolate around the side, I will dive into it because I think it tastes great. And, honestly, once in a blue moon, I think that is probably fine.
Yeah,
if you're celebrating one of your children's birthdays or whomever it is, I think that's okay. It's just what you do every day, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think some of the life hacks that we're seeing work are find a substitution. So, for example, I think it's 87% cocoa dark chocolate, which, by the way, doesn't taste that great. But when I have an urge for sugar, I eat that, which is pretty healthy. It kind of satisfies it a little bit. But also, if I didn't have that, I would pull something else out. I think that's the key for me, is to try to find, if I see a problem, I'm an engineer, you'll see this, is, define the problem and then find a solution to that problem that works for you. And I think that's what's, I think Americans need to be figured out those tools that are different for everybody.
And one thing that's really helpful for me is to have a mindset of habits and routines. And I think habits are sometimes described as routines with soul, that go to the heart of the fabric of your being, and that if you can develop those positive habits with these issues in mind, alcohol, sugar, way of life, what you eat, that you are potentially on the right road. And once the best habit that I've adopted in the last few years is my 1 hour hike first thing in the morning before I do anything, before I eat anything. I get out with the 2 dogs, and the 2 dogs are a really big part of that, because if they don't go, I know about it, they want to go. But it's the best habit that I indulge in every day. It's the best hour of the day.
Yeah. No, I'm going to steal that line from you for sure. So
let me steal one of your lines then, just as we finish. This is a line from the conclusion part of your book. You're talking about the next step in your journey, and you kind of pose the question to readers of your book about the next step. So what is your next step?
Well, from a business standpoint, we are really focused on, so people often ask me, what does success look like for you? And for us, it is every community that we're in, being able to show that community was affected for the positive. So that, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, every community wanted a YMCA. It was kind of a thing that if you were in a community, if you could get a YMCA to move to your area, they were great for the community, brought everybody together. They gave everybody a lot of health options as well from just an exercise standpoint. It is to any community that wants a restore, any community that's focused on health, saying, I want to put a restore here. And the reason I want to put a restore here is I know it's going to have a positive health outcome on the community I'm in, and we'll be able to show that with data over time. That's what gets, I'm in a building right now, it's got over 100 people. What gets us so excited is we see that we're helping these communities we're in, and it's just a matter of how do we get to more communities, because while we have tens of thousands of members, that means we have millions of people that actually don't know what we offer, and making sure more people understand what we have to offer, I think will really have a positive impact on society. So that's what's next for us, is really making sure we continue to add products and services and therapies that help clients to pull that data together to be able to show those change of outcomes over a short period and long periods of time, and then to get to as many people as we can to really change their outcomes. And
just a final question, this is something I often ask people. In terms of your own personal longevity aspirations, do you have goals? And what are the reasons why you do this? If you really have to search into your heart and soul and explain why you do all of this as it relates to your own longevity.
So my own longevity. So I tend to think a little bit different. I tend to think of health span. And what I mean by that is I focus on the time in life when I can live relatively disease-free. I can do the things I could love to do. I can kiteboard, I can surf, I can sail. For me, I am focused on making sure I can do those as late in life as possible. For me, that will be the success. I do think that we conflate lifespan and health span. I think most consumers, and I don't think I'm unique in this, is actually really worried about that health span. The idea of, later years, I living to be 120, but 30 of those years being terrible, where I don't know who I am or where I am, that to me has no interest. I have zero interest in that. So I think we're a little too focused on making people live longer, and what we are focused on here is helping people live better for longer. I think that's a pretty unique distinction and important distinction that my own personal drive, and I think that as a company, what we're focused on.
Well, Steve, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm going to follow your work with interest. I think you're doing a great job. Thank you so much.
Peter, thanks for having me.
This podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. We do not offer medical advice. If you have health concerns of any kind, or you are considering adopting a new diet or exercise regime, you should first consult your doctor.